So my English name is Susan Blight. I'm a citizen of the Anishinaabe Nation of Treaty Number 3, a band member at Couchiching First Nation. That's where my mom comes from, as well as my grandfather. My dad's family and my grandmother comes from around that area at Couchiching. My dad's family on his mother's side is from Lake of the Woods, specifically Mishko-Simini-Zebing, which is Big Grassy First Nation. I've lived in Toronto since 2010. I'm an artist working in public art, site-specific installation, and more recently textiles and wearable art. I'm also an educator, so an assistant professor at OCAD University, as well as the chair of Indigenous Visual Culture. So that's my connection to OCAD. My work is connected to the themes of the exhibition in the sense that I've tried to use my artistic practice to bring together, or at the very least address questions about the intersections of art and activism, about how we as artists might creatively organize to, I guess, advance this project of decolonization. As well, I'm really heavily invested in a resurgence of Anishinaabe cultural aesthetics and aesthetics more broadly. So to that end, I've worked a lot with Anishinaabemowin, which is the language of my people. I'm a Anishinaabe second language learner, so I currently speak Anishinaabemowin at an intermediate level, learning it as an adult. For obvious reasons, that's the case. Both my grandparents were fluent speakers, but for obvious reasons, I'm learning it as a second language. And so that's how I see my work connected to the themes in other tongues, as I try to use my work to address those questions, to bring to the surface histories that have been obscured, and to think about specifically Anishinaabe futurities as a praxis of decolonization. Sure. Well, the first piece, and this is the piece that was used on the t-shirt at On-Site Gallery, is Aki, Aki, Aki Dimenendizowin, which in English translates to land, 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 freedom. This piece was a long time coming in the sense that it's inspired by a story told to me by a language teacher of mine who has since passed away. This was somebody really important to me, and one of the stories that he told me was about trains in northwestern Ontario, which is also where I grew up. Trains have a really interesting history. They ran directly through my reserve, and in fact, actually in front of my grandmother's and grandfather's home. So from a very early age, they're a really present memory for me. Oftentimes, Anishinaabe people were jumping trains to either get from one place to another. So in that sense, they're connected to mobility, movement, and freedom. At the same time, they're heavily implicated in the colonization of my people in our territories. In fact, trains are one of the primary reasons why the Crown wanted to sign Treaty 3 with the Anishinaabe. I also, I think they're kind of interesting in the sense that they have this history of being implicated in colonization, but also representative of an ability to move across land. And so for people who were often through genocidal policy prevented from moving, I think that's a really interesting location of tension. And so Aki, meaning land, is written in or mimics, I would say, the iconic CN rail font that was designed by Alan Fleming, and in the iconic red. I actually have two pieces in the show, in the exhibition. And the second piece is called Tracings, or the Longing to Have You Here. This was a piece of text that I wrote as part of my dissertation. It's in a chapter called The Sturgeon Must Live as a Sturgeon. And it really kind of is a poetic way of addressing all of the sturgeons in my life, meaning the sturgeons of our territory. The Anishinaabe of my territory have a really, I would say, spiritual, reciprocal, and relational relationship with the sturgeon. as well. My grandfather and my mother are Name Dodem, which is Sturgeon clan. And there's also in that chapter a story about the removal of a First Nation in my territory to make way for Quetico Provincial Park. And that place was called Sturgeon Lake First Nation. The writing in it is a poetic writing that addresses those things. And in fact, my goal with that writing was to collapse time within one paragraph, to think about the past, present, and future all collapsing into one. So if you look at the English writing, you'll see that there's sort of motions towards that kind of collapsing of time into one moment. This is a sort of addressing of Indigenous conceptions of nonlinear time. So on the wall in white, so it's white on the wall, is a vinyl transfer of the text in Anishinaabemowin. In front of that, or underneath that rather, is a shelf with 7 sets of business cards that break up the text in English. And the business cards are really meant to give you pieces or traces of what's being written on the wall. But of course, because it's in English, it's fragmented. You can't sort of take them all, but they can also be put together in different ways. But again, a sort of reference to nonlinear time. I think the point of it was to have that tension as an Indigenous second language learner, to have that tension around the knowability of our language and the struggle to know our language, while at the same time sort of breaking up or trying to break up the dominance of English, or the hegemonic dominance of English. I chose business cards because to me, English is often connected to bureaucratic relations, formal relations, but they're also very mobile. You know, you can take them with you and put them in your pocket. But again, they're fragments of the larger text. So my hope is that I like to give viewers something to take home as well. I tend to work outside of gallery spaces for the most part. So when it's in a gallery, I like to give viewers something to take with them to sort of remove that distance between art object and viewer of art. But at the same time, I think the business cards speak to a kind of formality while at the same time being something you can put in your pocket. My grandparents have both passed on to the spirit world, and so it's actually my grandfather who was the last grandparent I had, but also the last fluent speaker of Anishinaabemowin in our family. Like, we have people in the family currently trying to learn the language, but he was raised with it, and he was the last person who was. And so when he passed on, it was almost like a feeling within the grief of the loss of my grandfather, this feeling of like an urgency to reconnect those things that were severed through colonization. So that's when I actually got very serious about learning the language. Yeah, the language is definitely a bridge. It connects us to our ancestors who've passed, but it also connects us to the knowledge that they've passed on to us. Like, there is knowledge within Anishinaabemowin, like deep philosophical knowledge coded within the language that becomes very apparent when you begin to learn it. Yeah. As artists, we never know how a work will come out. Once a work takes material form, it does take on a little bit of its own life. Like, there's certain things, there's a certain space, I think, between your intention as an artist and the materiality of the object. And in that space, things can happen that were unexpected. But I think as well, all of my work and all of my writing also has the added sort of benefit of teaching me something about our ways and our people, my people, and our histories. So that part feels really important. I tend to use my work to help myself to come to understand certain things, to work through certain things and questions that I have, but also to reconnect those things. Like, it feels like my work sort of propels me or helps me to go forward in my journey of reclamation. Yeah.